Imagine sitting in a cafe in Hamburg. You order a cup of coffee. The price on the menu says 5,000 marks. It's expensive, shocking even, considering that just 2 years ago, a cup of coffee cost 50 pfennigs. But you need the caffeine, so you order it. You drink the coffee. It takes you perhaps 20 minutes. When you ask for the bill, the waiter apologizes. He tells you the price has changed. It is no longer 5,000 marks. It is now 8,000 marks. You argue. You shout. You tell him this is robbery. But while you are arguing, a man comes in from the bank next door and tapes a new exchange rate to the wall. The price is now 10,000 marks. If you had just paid immediately, you would have saved half your money. This is not a fiction. This is the reality of life in the Weimar Republic during the autumn of 1923. We have all seen the photos of children building forts out of worthless banknotes or women burning cash in stoves because it was cheaper than coal. But there is a part of this story that history books usually leave out. A part that is much more dangerous because it is much more seductive. While the currency was dying, while the money in your pocket was rotting like overripe fruit, the German stock market was having the greatest bull run in the history of finance. If you looked at the charts in November 1923, the German stock index wasn't crashing. It was going vertical. It went up by billions of percent. People were looking at their brokerage accounts and seeing numbers they couldn't even pronounce. They were technically trillionaires. The newspapers reported that the German stock market was the best performing asset class on earth. Foreign speculators rushed in to buy shares of Daimler, Siemens, and Rhine Steel, but it was a lie. The stocks weren't going up because the companies were succeeding. The factories were idle. The workers were striking. The supply chains were broken. The stocks were going up because the money measuring them was dying. This phenomenon has a name. The Austrian economist Ludwig von Mises identified it in his analysis of the collapse. He called it the Katastrophenhausse. In English, it translates to the crack-up boom. It is the final terminal phase of a fiat currency system. It is the moment when the population realizes that their money is doomed, and they stampede into anything that isn't cash. They buy stocks, not for profit, but for survival. They bid prices up to the moon, creating the illusion of a massive economic boom, right up until the second the entire system evaporates. And here is the terrifying part. If you look at the S&P 500 today, if you look at the NASDAQ, if you look at the price of housing in America, you're looking at the exact same chart as Germany in 1922. We are told we are in a bull market. We are told the economy is strong. We are told the soft landing is here. But what if the stock market hitting 6,000 isn't a sign of American strength? What if it's the smoke alarm warning us of the dollar's death? Today, we are going to disassemble the mechanism of the crack-up boom. We are going to look at the 3 historical times this has happened before, in France, in Germany, and in Venezuela. We are going to prove mathematically why the United States has now entered this exact protocol. And we are going to explain why the wealth you think you have in your retirement account is in grave danger of vanishing, even as the numbers on the screen keep going up. To understand the crack-up boom, we have to unlearn everything we have been taught about how markets work. CNBC, Bloomberg, the Wall Street Journal, they all operate on a simple assumption. Price equals value. If the price of Amazon stock goes up, it must mean Amazon is more valuable. It must mean they are selling more goods, making more profit, or growing their market share. But in a monetary crisis, this assumption breaks. In a monetary crisis, price equals devaluation. Let me explain the physics of this. Imagine you have a ruler that is 12 inches long. You use it to measure a table. The table is 4 feet long. Now, imagine the government decides to shrink the inch. They cut every inch in half. Suddenly, your table measures 8 feet long. Did the table grow? Did you get more wood? Did the table become twice as valuable? No, the measuring stick just broke. This is exactly what is happening to the US dollar. Since the year 2020, the United States Federal Reserve has increased the supply of M2 money by over 40% in a historically short window. They printed more money in 2 years than they did in the previous century of the Republic's existence. When you flood the world with that many dollars, the value of each individual dollar must go down. It is not a theory. It is the law of supply and demand. But, and this is the key, it doesn't go down evenly. The newly printed money has to go somewhere. It doesn't just disappear. It seeks a home. It seeks a store of value. In the 1970s, during the last big inflation crisis, the money flowed into commodities. Oil, gold, and wheat exploded in price. But in the 2020s, the financial system is different. We are financialized. The money flowed into the financial markets. It flowed into the S&P 500. It flowed into real estate. It flowed into crypto. This created a bifurcated reality, a split screen economy. On one screen, you have the asset economy. This is the world of the stock market. It looks amazing. Prices are at all-time highs. Corporate buybacks are at record levels. If you own assets, you feel rich. The wealth effect makes you spend more, go on vacations, buy luxury cars. On the other screen, you have the real economy. This is the world of wages and expenses. Here, the picture is a disaster. Real wages, adjusted for inflation, have been negative for 24 consecutive months. The cost of food is up 30%. The cost of insurance is up 40%. The cost of buying a home has doubled. The crack-up boom is what happens when these two realities collide. It is the moment when the asset economy accelerates away from the real economy, so fast that the link between them snaps. Investors stop caring about PE ratios. They stop caring about dividends. They stop caring about reality. They just know one thing. Cash is trash. I must buy assets. This creates a feedback loop. The more the currency weakens, the more stocks go up. The more stocks go up, the more people panic buy them to hedge against inflation. The panic buying drives stocks higher, which makes the currency look even weaker. It is a death spiral. And once it starts, it is mathematically impossible to stop without destroying the currency completely. History is a circle. The players change, the technology changes, but the human behavior and the math remains identical. To see our future, we must look at the very first instance of a modern crack-up boom. We must travel to Paris in the year 1720. France was bankrupt. King Louis XIII, the Sun King, had spent the nation into ruin with endless wars and the construction of Versailles. The debt was so massive that the interest payments exceeded the total tax revenue of the country. Does that sound familiar? It should. It is the exact position of the United States today. Enter John Law. John Law was a Scottish gambler, a convicted murderer, and a financial genius. He came to the region of France with a revolutionary idea. He said, "The problem is that you are using gold and silver. Metal is scarce. It restricts trade. You should replace metal with paper credit. Paper is infinite. If we print enough paper money, we can pay off the debt, stimulate the economy, and make France the wealthiest nation on earth." The region agreed. He gave John Law control of the Royal Bank and a monopoly on trade with the Americas through a company called the Mississippi Company. Law began to print paper livres. At first, it worked like magic. The economy roared back to life. People had money to spend, debts were paid, the good times were back. But then, Law needed to sponge up the excess money he had printed. So, he issued shares in the Mississippi Company. He marketed these shares brilliantly. He told the French people that the Mississippi River Valley in America was paved with emeralds and mountains of gold. It was a lie. It was actually a swamp filled with alligators. But the hype was irresistible. The French people used their newly printed paper money to buy Mississippi shares. The stock price went parabolic. It started at 500 livres. The streets of Paris around Law's office were so crowded with desperate buyers that people were trampled to death. The word millionaire was invented during this specific bubble to describe the people who got rich on Mississippi stock. This was a classic crack-up boom. The stock market was soaring. The millionaires were buying palaces and carriages. Paris felt richer than it ever had in its history. But beneath the surface, the currency was dying. John Law had to print more and more paper money to keep the stock price going up. If the stock dipped, he printed money to buy it back. He was performing quantitative easing 300 years before the Federal Reserve existed. By late 1720, the inflation spilled over from the stock market into the real economy. The price of bread doubled, then tripled. The people realized that the paper livres were worthless. They rushed to the bank to convert their paper back into gold. But, of course, the gold wasn't there. The crash was instantaneous and total. The Mississippi stock fell from 10,000 to 0. The paper currency became worthless confetti. The millionaires were suddenly beggars. France collapsed into a depression that lasted for decades and eventually laid the groundwork for the violent French Revolution. The lesson of John Law is the lesson of the crack-up boom. A stock market boom funded by money printing is not wealth. It is a hallucination. And right now, the United States is running the John Law playbook step for step. We have the bankrupt treasury, we have the infinite paper theory, we have the story stock, and we have the initial phase of the boom. The only difference is the scale. John Law destroyed France. The Federal Reserve is risking the entire global financial system. Let's bring this to the present day. Let's look at your portfolio. If you open your 401k or your Robinhood app, you see green numbers. You see the S&P 500 hovering near all-time highs, around the 5,000 or 6,000 level. You feel good. You think, the economy must be okay. But let me show you the most important chart in finance, the chart that Wall Street never shows you. If you price the S&P 500 in US dollars, it is at an all-time high. But if you price the S&P 500 in gold, real money, it is actually lower today than it was in the year 2000. Let me repeat that. In real purchasing power terms, the American stock market has not made a new high in 25 years. All the gains, all the wealth creation, all the dividends, it was all just inflation. It was just the ruler getting shorter. Since 1971, when President Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard, the S&P 500 has risen by roughly 5,000%. But the supply of US dollars has also risen by roughly 5,000%. The correlation is nearly 1-to-1. The stock market has effectively become a tracking mechanism for the M2 money supply. It is not measuring corporate genius. It is measuring central bank debasement. This is why the crack-up boom is so deceptive. In the early stages, where we are now, it feels fantastic. Your house creates equity. Your stocks go up. Your debt feels lighter because you are paying it back with cheaper dollars. This is the boom part. But the crack-up comes when the illusion breaks. We are currently seeing the first cracks in the dam. Look at the bond market. The U.S. Treasury bond, the so-called risk-free asset, has lost nearly 50% of its value since 2020. This is the worst crash in the history of the U.S. bond market. Worse than 1929, worse than 2008. Why are bonds crashing? Because the smart money, the sovereigns, the central banks, the institutional giants, knows that the inflation is not transitory. They know the U.S. government cannot pay its debt without printing, so they are selling bonds. And where are they moving that money? They are moving it into the Magnificent Seven tech stocks. They are moving it into Bitcoin. They are moving it into gold. They are positioning themselves for the crack-up boom. They are treating companies like Apple and Microsoft not as businesses, but as lifeboats. They are parking trillions of dollars in these stocks because they believe these companies will survive the death of the dollar, while the U.S. government might not. This explains why the stock market is so concentrated, why only 7 stocks are carrying the entire market, while the other 493 are stagnant. It is a flight to safety, disguised as a bull market. The investors aren't saying, "I love Nvidia." They are saying, "I hate the dollar." And this is exactly what happened in Weimar Germany. In 1922, everyone bought shares of the Ruhr industrial giants. They piled into a tiny handful of massive conglomerates that owned real assets. The rest of the German economy withered and died, but those few stocks soared to the heavens. We are watching a replay. The script is identical. The actors have just swapped top hats for business suits. But if you're sitting there thinking, "Great, I'll just buy stocks and ride the boom," you are missing the most dangerous variable. The variable that wiped out the German middle class, even though they owned stocks. The variable called the reset. Because a crack-up boom doesn't end with a soft landing. It ends with a currency reform. It ends with the old money being declared worthless and a new money taking its place. And in that transition, in that split second between the old system dying and the new system starting, is where the greatest wealth transfer in history takes place. There's a question that haunts every working class American today. It is the question that decides elections and starts revolutions. Why is the stock market at an all-time high while I can't afford groceries? The answer is not corporate greed. It is not supply chains. Those are symptoms. The disease is something much older. In the 1730s, an Irish banker named Richard Cantillon wrote a manuscript that described the secret engine of inequality. He discovered a principle that is now known as the Cantillon effect. It states, simply, money is not neutral. When a central bank creates new money, that money enters the economy at a specific point. It doesn't magically appear in everyone's pocket at the same time. In our modern system, the Federal Reserve creates digits on a screen and gives them to the primary dealer banks, the titans of Wall Street like JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs. These banks get the money first. They get it at near zero interest. And most importantly, they get it before prices have risen. So what do they do with this fresh cash? They don't buy milk. They don't buy gas. They buy assets. They buy stocks. They buy bonds. They buy entire neighborhoods of single-family homes. This buying pressure drives up the price of assets. If you are already rich, if you own assets, you get richer. Your portfolio explodes. You feel like a genius. But then the money starts to move. It trickles down from the banks to the corporations, then to the subcontractors, and finally, 18 months later, it reaches the wage earner. By the time the new money reaches your paycheck in the form of a 3% cost of living adjustment, the prices of everything you need to survive, food, fuel, housing, have already risen by 20%. You got the money last. You didn't get the purchasing power, you got the inflation. This is the Cantillon effect. It is a wealth transfer mechanism disguised as monetary policy. Look at this chart. The S&P 500 did not hit 6,000 because American companies became 500% more efficient at making widgets. It hit 6,000 because the Federal Reserve pumped $8 trillion into the top of the pyramid. The melt-up we are seeing right now is the Cantillon effect in its final, most desperate phase. The liquidity is trapped at the top. The wealthy are trading paper assets back and forth at ever higher valuations, creating a closed loop of prosperity that excludes 90% of the population. This explains the disconnect. The stock market is no longer a reflection of the economy. It is a reflection of the dilution of the currency. But why doesn't the government stop? Why don't they turn off the faucet? Because they can't. We have now entered a phase of the collapse that economists call fiscal dominance. This is the point where the national debt becomes so large that it, not the Federal Reserve, dictates monetary policy. Let's look at the math. It is simple and it is terrifying. The United States government is currently over $36 trillion in debt. For years, this didn't matter because interest rates were at 0%. You can carry infinite debt if it costs nothing to service it. But when inflation struck in 2021, the Fed was forced to raise rates. Now, that $36 trillion debt is rolling over at 4% or 5% interest. The result? In fiscal year 2024, the United States spent $882 billion on interest payments alone. By 2025, that number is projected to cross $1 trillion. Let that sink in. We now spend more on interest than we do on the entire national defense budget. We spend more on interest than we do on Medicare. We spend more on interest than we do on all veterans' benefits combined. Every single dollar of personal income tax collected by the IRS is now effectively burned just to service the debt. It buys no roads. It pays for no schools. It just keeps the bondholders from foreclosing. This is the trap. If the Fed keeps interest rates high to fight inflation, the interest payments will spiral exponentially, bankrupting the U.S. Treasury. But if the Fed lowers interest rates to save the Treasury, they unleash the inflation monster again, and the dollar collapses. They are trapped between default and hyperinflation. And history tells us exactly which path they will choose. Governments never choose default. Default is political suicide. It means the checks stop coming. It means the military goes unpaid. It means the empire ends today. So they choose inflation. They always choose inflation. They will lower rates. They will restart the money printer. They will invent new acronyms for quantitative easing. They will do whatever it takes to keep the government solvent. And the smart money knows this. The biggest hedge funds in the world aren't buying stocks because they trust the economy. They are buying stocks because they are front-running the inevitable bailout. They know that a tsunami of new money is about to be printed to pay those interest bills. And when that money hits the system, the crack-up boom will go vertical. Now we arrive at the darkest part of the story, the part that almost no one knows about until it is too late. Let's say you are smart. Let's say you buy stocks to ride the crack-up boom. You see your portfolio double, then triple. You feel safe. But there's a secret hidden in the plumbing of the financial system. A secret that has been carefully engineered over the last 30 years to strip you of everything you think you own. It is called the Great Taking. Most Americans believe that when they buy a stock, say a share of Apple, they own that share. They imagine a digital certificate with their name on it sitting in a vault at their brokerage. You are wrong. If you read the fine print of your brokerage agreement, specifically the parts governed by Article 8 of the Uniform Commercial Code, you will discover a horrifying reality. You do not have ownership of your stocks. You have what is legally defined as a security entitlement. This sounds like a technicality. It is not. It is the difference between owning a house and renting a hotel room. In the modern financial system, the legal owner of all publicly traded securities is a shadowy entity called Seed & Co. Your broker is just a security intermediary. And you? You are a beneficial owner. Here is why this matters. In a solvent system, this works fine. You click sell, and the system credits your account. But in a systemic collapse, the kind of collapse that ends empires, your legal status changes. If your brokerage firm fails, or if the massive derivatives clearinghouses blow up, the assets held by the broker are not treated as your property. They are treated as general collateral of the brokerage. This means that the secured creditors, the too big to fail, megabanks, and the derivatives counterparties have a priority claim on your stocks. They can legally confiscate your Apple shares, your ETF holdings, and your bonds to cover the broker's debts. You become an unsecured creditor. You get in line at bankruptcy court. And by the time the line gets to you, there will be nothing left. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is the law. It was written into the UCC in the 1990s. It was tested during the Lehman Brothers collapse. And it is the ultimate trap of the financialized world. The crack-up boom lures you into the casino with rising prices. It makes you feel rich on paper. And then, the Great Taking locks the doors. When the system resets, the vast majority of paper wealth will simply be wiped off the ledger. The numbers on your screen will remain high, right up until the moment the screen goes black. This fear, this intuitive sense that the system is rigged, explains the strangest anomaly in the stock market today. The Magnificent Seven, Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, Google, Amazon, Meta, Tesla. These 7 companies are currently propping up the entire US stock market. If you remove them, the S&P 493 has basically been flat for 2 years. Why is everyone crowding into these few stocks? Because in a crack-up boom, investors stop analyzing earnings and start analyzing survival. Institutional investors, sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, the Swiss National Bank, treat these companies not as businesses, but as sovereign nations. Think about it. Apple has more cash on hand than most countries in the United Nations. Microsoft has a better credit rating than the United States government. These companies have global revenue streams. They earn money in euros, yen, yuan, and rupees. They have pricing power. If inflation hits 20%, Microsoft raises the price of Office 365 by 20%. And businesses pay it because they have to. These companies are the ultimate inflation hedge. The market is concentrating into them because they are viewed as the only lifeboats that will float when the dollar drowns. It is a flight to safety taking place within the stock market. But even this is a trap, because if you hold these shares in a standard brokerage account, you are still subject to the great taking. You are holding a golden ticket in a wallet that belongs to someone else. We are seeing a bifurcation of reality. The financial economy is soaring to the heavens on a wave of printed money. The real economy is sinking into a depression, and the bridge between them, the legal system that protects property rights, has been quietly dismantled while you were watching Netflix. So, how does it end? If the government is trapped, if the money is broken, and if the laws are rigged, what happens when the clock strikes midnight? The crack-up boom is the party before the police arrive. We are now approaching the trigger event, the moment the bond market finally says no. We have talked about the illusion of the boom. We have talked about the mathematics of the debt trap. We have talked about the legal confiscation waiting in the fine print. But now we must answer the most important question of all. When? When does the music stop? When does the melt-up reverse? When does the crack-up phase actually begin? History tells us that the end does not come from the stock market itself. The stock market is the last to know. The signal comes from the bond market. The bond market is the smart money. It is the bedrock of the global financial system. It is where nations borrow the money to exist. And right now, the bedrock is cracking. In every previous hyperinflationary event, from France in the 1790s to Weimar in the 1920s, the collapse began with a failed auction. Imagine this scenario. It is a Tuesday in 2026. The U.S. Treasury announces it needs to borrow another $500 billion to fund the government for the next 3 months. They hold an auction to sell Treasury bonds. Usually, foreign nations, banks, and pension funds line up to buy them. The U.S. Treasury is considered the risk-free asset of the world. But on this specific Tuesday, nobody shows up. The bid-to-cover ratio drops below 1.0. The primary dealers refuse to buy the debt at the offered rate. They demand 6%, 7%, 8% interest to compensate for the inflation risk. This is the heart attack moment. If the government cannot borrow, it cannot pay its bills. It cannot pay the military. It cannot pay Social Security. The gears of the empire grind to a halt. In that split second, the Federal Reserve has to make the final, fatal choice. They cannot let the government default, so they step in. They become the buyer of last resort. They print the $500 billion out of thin air and buy the bonds themselves. This is called yield curve control. It is the death knell of a currency. It is the moment the world realizes that the debt will never be paid back in real value. It will only be paid back in newly printed, worthless confetti. When this happens, the melt-up in stocks will turn violent. We will see what economists call a biflationary shock. The price of essentials, food, energy, gold, will go vertical. But the price of financial promises, bonds, derivatives, and eventually the speculative tech stocks will crash in real terms. Why? Because in the final panic, liquidity dries up. You might see the S&P 500 at 10,000 points, but you won't be able to sell your shares because the brokerage systems will be frozen, or the dollars you get in exchange will buy nothing. And this brings us back to the great taking. In this moment of chaos, the clearinghouses will fail, the brokerages will invoke their emergency clauses, and the security entitlements you hold will be frozen. So who survives? Who are the people who walk out of the burning theater alive? History gives us a very short list of things that survive the death of a currency. It is the list of assets that have no counterparty risk. If you have to ask who is promising to pay me this, it is not on the list. If it relies on a CEO, a central banker, or a politician to function, it is not on the list. If it is a liability on someone else's balance sheet, it is not on the list. Here is the survivor's portfolio, the only assets that truly belong to you. First, gold, the king of kings. Gold is the only asset in the world that is not someone else's debt. It is the immutable ledger of human labor. In 1923 Weimar, a single ounce of gold could buy a city block in Berlin. Why? Not because gold became more valuable, but because gold is the constant. When the paper money went to zero, gold was the only thing that retained the memory of value. Look at the central banks, China, Russia, Poland, Singapore. They are buying gold at the fastest rate in history. They know the dollar is dying. They are building their lifeboats. Are you? If you don't hold it, you don't own it. Physical gold in your possession is the ultimate insurance policy against a monetary reset. Second, Bitcoin, the digital gold. For the digital age, Bitcoin offers the same properties as gold, but with one crucial advantage: portability. You cannot cross a border with a suitcase full of gold bars without being stopped or confiscated. But you can cross a border with 12 words in your head that unlock millions of dollars of wealth anywhere on Earth. Bitcoin is the exit hatch from the traditional financial system. It is the only asset that the great taking cannot touch if you hold your own keys. If your Bitcoin is on an exchange like Coinbase, you don't own it. You have a security entitlement. You are vulnerable. If it is in cold storage, it is yours. It is mathematically secured property that no government can seize or debase. Third, productive land. In the end, humans need to eat. Land that produces food, water, or energy is the ultimate base layer of wealth. In every hyperinflation, the people who suffered the least were the farmers. They had the hard goods that the city dwellers were desperate for. You don't need to be a farmer, but you need to own land that can be farmed. It is the only asset that cannot be printed. Fourth, direct registration. If you must own stocks, if you truly believe in a company like Microsoft or Exxon, you must remove those shares from the brokerage system. You can direct register shares in your own name. This removes them from the DTCC. It turns a security entitlement back into property. It means your name is on the company's books, not your broker's name. It is harder to trade, it is slower, but in a collapse. It is the difference between owning a share of the company and owning a claim against a bankrupt broker. The hardest part of this transition is not the financial part, it is the psychological part. The crack-up boom is designed to trick you. It plays on your greed. It plays on your fear of missing out. When you see your neighbor getting rich on NVIDIA call options, and when you see the S&P 500 hitting new highs every week, when you hear the media telling you that inflation is beaten, it takes immense mental strength to sit on the sidelines. It takes courage to hold boring assets like gold or cash equivalents while the rest of the world is partying. You will feel stupid. You will feel like you're missing out. But remember the man in Berlin in 1923. Remember the man who looked at his stock portfolio and thought he was a trillionaire? And remember how he ended up sweeping the streets for a loaf of bread because he didn't convert those paper profits into real wealth while he had the chance. The smart money is already positioning. Mark Zuckerberg is selling stock to buy land in Hawaii. Jeff Bezos is selling stock to buy mansions in Miami. The insiders are cashing out of the paper casino and buying real things. They know what time it is. The window to exit the burning theater is still open. The balcony is crowded and the party is raging. But you can smell the smoke if you take a deep breath. Don't let the flashing lights of the stock market blind you to the reality of the math. We are standing at the end of an era. The 80-year debt supercycle that began after World War II is ending. The 50-year fiat money experiment that began in 1971 is ending. The crack-up boom is not a theory. It is the final spasmodic convulsion of a dying system. It creates a beautiful light show right before the bulb burns out. Most people will enjoy the show. They will chase the green candles. They will borrow money to buy more bubble assets. They will dance until the music stops. But you have a choice. You can look at the all-time highs and see prosperity. Or you can look at the debt, look at the printing press, and look at the legal traps, and see the warning signal. The window to exchange your paper promises for real things is still open. You can still buy gold. You can still secure your Bitcoin. You can still buy land. You can still position yourself outside the blast radius of the sovereign debt crisis. But that window will not stay open forever. One day, perhaps a Tuesday when a treasury auction fails, the window will slam shut, and the great taking will begin. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes with a rhythm so consistent it might as well be a metronome. The rhythm is getting louder. Can you hear it? If you want to survive the transition, you need more than just fear. You need a map. In our next video, we will cover the central bank digital currency rollout and exactly how they plan to lock the exits before the final crash. Subscribe, because the information you don't have is the information that will cost you everything.